Welcome back, everyone, to the CK Sims Show. Thank you so much for tuning in again this week. If before we begin, if you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. It means so much and it helps the show a lot. Today's show is very exciting. I am so excited to have this conversation. It is such an important conversation and it's a timely conversation to have. We are talking with Dr. Niran Al Agba, and she is a pediatrics doctor, a scientist who provides second opinions on cases that involve child abuse. And you're going to want to stick around because the things that I learned in this conversation were mind blowing. We're going to get into it right after this.
A little show of happy, a little show of shine. Come and hear some stories, maybe leave inspired. Give your mind a break, maybe heal your soul. Come and spend a while at the CK Sim Show.
So Dr. Niran Al Agba, okay.
Yes, you're perfect.
Thank you for being on the show. We're a bit, I guess, loosey-goosey at the moment because we had some technical issues. Apparently, we went live, and I didn't know we were going live, but it wouldn't have been very exciting, I'm sure, because you left, you said, and my internet went out. So they would have been, what's happening with the live right now? But so, yeah, okay. So we're here and we're going to make it work. We're going to get through it for sure. Thank you
Best
so
start
much.
ever.
Yes.
No, my pleasure. Best start ever.
So you have a fascinating role in life. I mean, I'm sure you have many fascinating roles in life, but the one that we're here to talk about today, and I got to tell you, I read your form, and you know how, like, just naturally as people, we tend to draw pictures in our minds.
Yes.
I anticipated you being so much older, right? And I anticipated you being kind of like, which is like me talking about my bias, like what happens in my brain. Like with like pointy glasses and like really sort of rigid. Like this is how you formed in my mind from your limited form, of course.
This is the best podcast ever, just so we're clear.
So I'm like, so when we join, I like I think you're younger than I am. And
no,
you're
I doubt it. I bet I'm older.
oh
51. I'm 51.
Okay, so not by much, 5 years. So like it's not by much then.
Okay.
You carry very well. Because I was
Thank
thinking
you.
you're maybe 40 at max. But because
I
the
love
only reason
it.
I was like went that high was because I'm like, okay, but I know that she has like a lot of like experience and she's
Yes.
also a medical doctor. So like you don't get out of the womb with that, right? You know what I mean? Like you have to work at that. So all right. So this is, yeah. No, so like we're here to talk about like a serious subject matter, but we're not really having a serious conversation yet, which is fine.
I love our conversation.
Yes. So you are a medical doctor.
Yes.
Now, what is your specialty in medicine?
So it is pediatrics, and I did kind of come out of the womb as a doctor because my grandfather was a family doctor, a primary care doctor, and my father was a pediatrician. So I started working here actually when I was about 11 years old, and being 51, that's 40 years working in this office. So I kind of have been doing it a long time, but as a doctor, only for about 25 years.
11 years old, you're at the family practice essentially, and you're helping out and you're doing your thing. And so it was in your blood to be in medicine. Now you're in pediatrics, so that's your specialty. That takes a long time, right? What, 11 years?
It does. It takes 11 years after high school at a minimum.
That's a lot. That's a big commitment.
It is.
That's a massive commitment, right? To do that.
Yes, it is.
And so hats off for that. Just Just like, just yeah. That's yeah. Big. It's a big commitment and a lot of. Um, I was a standardized patient and a teaching patient at a university a few years
Oh,
ago.
wow.
And the focus is on mental health. So like I got to work
Awesome.
with a lot of um, up and coming people who were doing the name is gone from my brain, and this happens a lot. Don't know if you can tell me what's wrong with me. I know you're in pediatrics, so I'm kind of like a child. Um, but they were doing their something exams. Anyway, border exams. I don't know.
Boards, yeah, they take boards
Board.
depending on
That's
the patient. Sometimes they have to do a standardized patient, which I guess it
yeah.
sounds like you were.
Yes, so I got to meet all of these people and learn so much about all the rigorous sort of training that they went through, all the
Wow,
years of school, and then like what they would have to do in residencies, and like it's hard work. Like
it
becoming a
is.
doctor is not for the faint of heart to start with. How long were you in the field of pediatrics? Actually, I don't know if I want to ask that question yet. I think the question I actually want to ask was all right. So, all right, yeah, because I got to get straight in my mind. So, I want the audience to know what it is you do, what your specialty is. So, you are an advocate.
I mean, I would say scientist. I try to stay away from advocate because that says I'm only on one side. And so I
Okay,
really
this is
look
fair. Well, I
at
like this.
I mean, I really look at the science, and then I'm an advocate for the child, always, but a scientist when it comes to looking at different, legal cases and things that I'm asked to review.
So, for the people at home, you are someone who will offer a second opinion in cases that surround child abuse.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. It's like that's heavy, right? When you think about that, like that's like a heavy work. Like that's extra on top of like being a pediatrician and what you probably have to see. I'm hoping that you get to see more blossom than other forms. Like I'm sure you see everything when it
I
comes to
I do
child.
see everything.
But then to also have to like, so I have to ask, what was the moment? What was the catalyst that sort of brought this to be?
The catalyst was I had a family that was wrongly accused of hurting their child, and I knew the family, and I'd seen the little 3, lined bruises on the kid's hip that were about the size of 3 matchsticks, and I knew that this family did not abuse their child, and I couldn't believe this was even happening. And they had to get attorneys, and I wrote letters saying, "Hey, I saw this mark. This is not abuse." And I was overridden by at the time was a quote child abuse doctor, but she really wasn't. She was a general pediatrician like me with maybe 20 less years of experience. And when I saw the imbalance of what was happening, people rushing to judgment rather than using science, I guess I sort of started to realize that there's some errors in this field, and every case really deserves a second look before you pull a child from the home.
That's crazy, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm like, so you have a family that you know,
Yes, I still know to this day. It's been
and
six.
they're accused of harming their child, and
Yes.
I'm assuming we have it's called Children's Aid Society here in Canada, but children's what's it called in the U.S.?
CPS, Child Protective
CPS.
Services.
Yes, that's what it is. I couldn't remember for a moment, but CPS. So they got involved, and then they took the child from the home.
No, thankfully, we got it to stop right at that point. So they were investigating and had a letter that said it was abuse and they should remove the child.
Oh, okay, okay, and then that was stopped. So then you realized, wait, there's a gap here.
Yes. And
And
then
how did you decide? Like, how did you decide to pivot? Like in that moment, you realized the gap was there. What was your next
I
steps?
didn't decide to pivot. Right, I didn't decide to pivot in that moment. What happened is I write an opinion column. I've written for the last 7, actually soon to be, I think, 8 years in my community, and the family asked me to write about this situation. They really wanted the doctor fired, and they asked me to write about it, and I did. And the actual hospital got upset with the newspaper and threatened to sue them if we named the doctor. But NBC picked up the story and knew the name of the doctor because there had been other cases where the doctor had made mistakes. And that's when I got plunged into this whole world that I didn't know existed of bias in child abuse investigations, a racial bias that's absolutely beyond even what you could imagine, but also like religious bias, ethnic bias, cultural bias, so many pieces, especially to anyone who's marginalized, any marginalized population, whether it's immigrants, LGBTQ families, people of color, poor, young teenage moms. I mean, you name it, I've come across it. And that's after the newspaper article, the Office of Public Defense in the state of Washington asked me to start looking at a few cases. And then it's grown to now 24 states.
That is, there's so much to unpack there because it's
I know.
incredible what you like. It's
Yes.
incredible what you're doing, but then it's also like you said some stuff there that you know, so this particular doctor that NBC had known the name of, what was his, do we know his story? Like what was his deal?
It's her story, and she was a
Her story.
pediatrician, and she was not a child abuse doctor. She was a general pediatrician, and essentially ended up getting terminated. Or I shouldn't say that. I should say eventually was no longer working there. I'm not sure of the details. Was she let go? Did she resign? I'm not sure. So I do want to be clear on that. But she no longer has that job, and she's not doing that job anywhere else in the United States. Yes.
So that does not happen just because a news outlet
Right.
shared a
There
story.
yes. There she had, let's see, there's exact terminology. It might escape me a little bit, but essentially, she had been a little bit less than honest in court is what I think they said, and this would be part of that, NBC investigation, where one of the judges had sanctioned this individual, and so there was, this evidence that each side now had to turn over and say, "Hey, this doctor's credibility is now, at risk in court." And so you really can't have a child abuse doctor going into court and saying these people need to lose their child if they don't have, the history of maybe always being accurate. I think is hopefully I'm characterizing that properly. But
Well,
I know there was something called exculpatory evidence that they had to turn over now in each case where this doctor was involved. That I do know.
okay.
Yes.
So essentially all the bones were exhumed from this person's,
Yes.
well, if there was bias and or non-scientific approach to what she was doing in court, then I think that justice was served, right?
Yes, and I thought it was just gonna be a one-off. I thought this was one doctor, and what I have kind of stumbled on over time is that the entire system really needs to be again, not saying anything about the whole system, saying second opinions are a really good idea. I think it's not that easy of a job to do child abuse medicine, and sometimes a second look, actually often a second look is really helpful and worthwhile.
What biases do you think exist, like, with doctors? I don't want to say as a whole, but what predominantly what you've seen, what kind of biases exist?
So what I've seen is especially the racial bias. I mean, there were times during I've been doing it for about 4 years, and during the first and second year, I wanna say roughly 3/4 of the people that I helped sort of defend or look at their cases, were people of color. And to me, some of the egregious mistakes were simply like, there were major misdiagnoses, and people just saw a black child, a black mother, and they saw a crime instead of seeing, a true diagnosis, which in some cases was organ failure or a genetic diagnosis that could have been made by any pediatrician. So again, there are moments I almost quit because I thought this can't be this bad. I can't believe what I'm seeing. And I kind of just decided to keep looking at these cases and hoping that those biases would disappear, and they have not disappeared. And Like I said, immigrants, Latinx population, Black folks, indigenous folks, people who are poor, people who live in small rural areas with no running water in their home. Those are the people that are accused and really can't do anything to defend themselves. And sometimes their children are misdiagnosed. Not all the time. Obviously, I say roughly 60% of the time it's an error, 40% that I agree that these children are being abused, and not from those groups necessarily, but on the whole of the cases I look at. Um, so again, a lot of errors and a lot of misdiagnoses and children that could be getting better care. And the people I work with tend to be people from marginalized groups in general.
Now, would you say that it's these doctors who are just assuming abuse and not doing their due diligence in like really looking for a proper diagnosis? Is an issue here?
I think it's a huge issue, yes. I think if you are trained, and if you think about a specialist, right? Just think about maybe like a a, a cardiologist. Just to throw, most of them are very good. So, but I just mean if you only see the heart, you're going to see heart problems. You're probably going to see heart problems sometimes when maybe that's not the leading cause of the problem,
Mhm.
because that's what you're used to, right? That's what you know. And I often say it's like, a hammer in search of a nail. They're going to be really good at finding nails, or at least putting it on the list when maybe some of us wouldn't put child abuse on the list. But the problem is sometimes it doesn't belong on the list. And so that's why I really think a second opinion is a great idea from someone who's not your colleague. Meaning, if you're working in the same hospital and you're a child abuse doctor next to the other child abuse doctor, that's not who should be checking your work. It should be either someone from another institution or someone who's out in general practice. Just a second look, an independent second look.
I think it should be blind.
I do too.
I don't
And they're,
I don't
yep,
think
they're,
that the doctor receiving the second opinion should know where it's coming from and vice versa. There should be an agency somewhere that handles that in and out so that it's completely unbiased about somebody else, right?
I would
Because
love that.
there is a sort of brothers and sisters in arms sort of mentality when it comes to doctors, right? And it's
Yes.
not second guessing them or perhaps admitting publicly that they may have taken part in malpractice or something of that sort. That exists. I know it exists in Canada. I've seen it myself, right? Where
Mhm.
doctors wouldn't go on record, even though that they knew that if the doctor had done this test or this test, this particular patient may not have ended up, say, in sepsis. Not death, but like not in sepsis, that sort of thing. Um, so, like a blind situation, it's it's really sad. So you've been doing this for 4 years,
Uh-huh.
and you're not noticing. Are you getting repeat doctors?
Oh,
Have you noticed?
yes. Oh, yes.
And are there steps to take to like, is there any mechanism in place where you can recommend to the board, for instance, that these people need to take additional training or
No, no, and what's crazy is child abuse doctors are completely immune, so if they make a mistake, it doesn't matter. They can't be sued, they can't be sued for malpractice, they can't be sued for, like, a civil rights violation, whatever things you can come up with, they're completely shielded. It's almost like, you know, that's it.
what? Sorry. I'm just hurting my brain right now.
I know, welcome,
Um,
welcome to my brain.
yeah, so okay, I'm gonna use Nuran right now, just as an example. We know you're not doing this, right? But
Mhm.
I just want to use it as an example. So Nuran is actually, let's use a completely different person. Um we'll just say Donald is a complete racist and misogynistic, doctor, right? Dr. Donald.
Okay.
And anytime he sees a child with like issues with pallor and or sunken skin or any sort of markage, whatever like that, where it's a person who is a different ethnicity or marginalized community. he's indicating on his notes that this is a potential child abuse situation. So what you're saying to me is that he could be doing that just simply because he's a racist bigot and there's no consequence. Like he
Correct.
might uproot 1,000 lives a year and there's no recourse that can be taken in that situation.
I mean, I would hope his colleagues would say, "Wow, you have taken every person of color and called them abused." So I'm hoping the colleagues would say something if something were that egregious. But again, in reality, if he were the only person in the state, as many of the states are, they have like one child abuse doctor for the whole state. If he were the only person in the state, and literally if he said every person of color is abusing their children, and even if half of them or more were proven not to be true, um, he's reporting abuse, and there's these immunities for doctors who report abuse. So one
Unless
would
NBC
hope,
gets involved.
yeah, one would hope there's some, like, maybe colleagues would notice, but, again, I've never seen a situation where, somebody's reported an abuse doctor
Well,
other than this one that we were involved in that was more about just, court rather than, the cases they reported.
Well, I mean, if you look
Yeah,
at, say, Dr.
there's no
Donald's
backup system.
colleagues, for instance, like Dr. JD, Dr. Pam, Dr. Christie, Dr. Pete, like all those, they would never report those things. I'm not going political, but I'm just making a point, right? Like there
Yes,
are people who report because this is mind-boggling to me that,
I know,
these families' lives could be torn apart just
correct.
because someone doesn't
Well,
want to
and I'll do you
has
one
bias.
better. Yeah, I'll do you one better. Every other doctor that's done this work, there's a few in the, like, middle of the country, one in Ohio, and I don't know the states where they're at very well, but our doctors here in Washington have written letters to their hospitals saying they're unethical for defending child abuse. And so on top of it, someone who does what I do takes a risk, right? Sticking their neck out and trying to look at the cases in a really objective way, not being on a side. That's why I don't say advocate per se. I am an advocate maybe
Mhm.
for the child, but I'm not for one side or the other. I have worked on both sides, the prosecution as well as the Office of Public Defense. I do more work on the defense side. I freely admit that. But again, I have told many defense attorneys, like, I can't help you. This is abuse. Or I'll say, this is a bad situation and we need people in there with eyes on this person. Maybe the parent's disabled and they need support. Like, I really try to look from the aspect of a pediatrician. So again, on top of it, the abuse doctors, they haven't done it to me yet, but they often will write about how unethical we are. And so we do this work. There's about a dozen of us in the country. I think I'm one of the few general pediatricians. But we do this work kind of at great risk because if we make one mistake, that can really hurt us. And nobody's perfect, right? You make the best call you can. So yeah, on
Well, but
top of it,
okay,
they're shielded and we are not.
so that is just mind-boggling.
Hmm.
Sorry.
I
So
know.
I want to pause there for a second because, like, obviously with medicine and science, it's not always exact, right? Like
Yes, correct.
99% of the time, A plus B is, I don't know, 33. I'm just giving you, I don't know, science or math apparently. But there are outliers that we may not be trained to look for, or I say we as if I'm a doctor, but let's be clear, I'm not. Um, that you would be trained to look for, or it might be missed. It's possible that's going to happen, right? So
Yes.
the fact that you don't have any protections, but they do, I don't have a magic mute button. I just muted myself, but that's messed up.
Yeah.
So way deeper than I could have ever imagined
I
from
know.
before.
I know.
It's so tell us about your process. Like what so somebody has some doctor, Dr. Donald, has indicated that there is abuse of a child in this family. This gets, I'm assuming, sent off somewhere to CPS, maybe,
Yes.
the doctor. And so then the CPS now has a file that's open on this particular family and this particular child. What happens to trigger you?
They get removed. So the first case, the child was not removed, right? Remember, it was my patient, and I sort of put a stop to that. But what triggers me getting a call is in the state of Washington, actually, and many states have a system for this, the child's removed. And if the family qualifies for funding, for public funding, for representation, right? If you cannot afford an attorney will be appointed for you. There's different arms to the Office of Public Defense that will help with parent representation. So an attorney who's assigned to the parent will then look at the case and call me and say, I need you to look at this case. And so usually the children are already out of the home. Sometimes they've been out of the home for 6 months, sometimes for less than 7 days. I think the shortest we've ever had where we won the early portion of the trial, which is called shelter care. A child was removed for 7 days. That's the lowest time of removal I've been able to be involved in.
Where
Um,
do they go?
they go to foster care. They force the parents to hand over the children in a parking lot or at the hospital. Sometimes they'll handcuff the parents and escort them out of the hospital. And parents always say to me, if someone tries to take my kids, they're going to have to call the police and I'm going to blank, blank, blank. And I usually say, yeah, well, that's pretty much how it works. You get handcuffed and you get hauled out of there. Um, and if you don't comply. So someone makes a decision arbitrarily in the middle of the night and you're escorted out. Sometimes they don't even have cars. Like they came in an ambulance with the kid and they need to call a friend to pick them up from the hospital that they've just been, handcuffed and escorted out of. I mean, you name it. I've heard all the scenarios by now.
I'm just like, there's so much to process, right? So
I
like
know.
so you said did you say 60% or 66%?
I
Was it
missed that. Say that
60%?
again.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
saw the
about
little
six.
blip. So I'm like, we're in a good conversation right now. Don't be messing with the Wi-Fi. Uh, so did you say 60% or 66%?
No, roughly depending, 60%, I usually either have an alternative explanation, a different medical diagnosis, or like I disagree about the findings. 40% of the time, I agree with what a child abuse doctor has said, and it's very clear it's abuse. There's really not, I will often tell the attorneys, this is not defendable. This is not a case I can help with, or I agree with the abuse doctor.
So now, because 60% is a big number, but like when you
It
think
is.
about the 40% of that is people who actually abusing their children, it's that's such a sticky situation. So the attorney, public defender, they they contact you and they ask you to look at a case. They send
Yes.
you a file, I'm assuming.
Yes, they send me the file, usually police reports, EMS reports, medical records, past medical history. Sometimes there's a lot of things that happen at birth, and some of these babies are very young. And often no one looks at the birth history, which really can turn a case around.
Do you is your work solely based on what's in the file, or do you go beyond that at any point?
Well, I try not to. Your point about being blinded is actually really, I think, an important one. I think that was your initial feeling when we were talking, and you're right. I try not to meet, and it sounds a little strange. I will occasionally see a family in person if I'm unsure about something. But for the most part, I try to do it as blind as possible to be very scientific, and really make sure I'm, staying inside what I think is scientific boundaries, or what can I prove, what can I evaluate.
Okay. So maybe you have this in your brain to go, I don't know, but like, can you give us a fictional or fictionized sort of scenario as to something that may have came to you that you were able to look like what were you looking at and what were you looking for in that process to understand the situation?
So, probably the most common thing I see is a child comes in, maybe they had a seizure or they stopped breathing, and they'll go in because they call the ambulance. Anybody who has a baby, and they find, let's say, head bleeding when they do a brain scan, and they find maybe like a clavicle fracture is a super common one. And so generally those kids are removed. They just for a single fracture and bleeding in the brain. Well, then you go back and you look at the birth history, and let's say a recent case where they tried to do a C-section and they lost the kid's head in the belly, which happens. To be clear, obstetrics is a very, very difficult specialty. It's dangerous. It's the most dangerous thing a woman goes through in her lifetime, childbirth. And we forget that. Even today, it's one of the biggest killers. So things don't always go
I don't know if
perfectly.
people I don't know if people forget that. I don't think enough people know actually how how dangerous it actually is and how many things that can go wrong and what happens to a woman's body during the gestation and all the whole thing. The world is not educated enough to know how it is for a woman to be able to go through that. And then, yeah, anyway,
Well, I mean,
I'm offended if you haven't picked it
this
up
may
by
sound
now.
cavalier, but I tell people if you're alive and you're leaving the hospital with a baby, like that's a win. That's it. That's a win.
And people will be like, "Well, this happens all the time,"
Yeah.
but like, no, like we see, the other statistic is that BIPOC people have a higher rate of infant mortality than Caucasian people, and there's reasons for that because
Yes.
bias exists in that space as well, right? So
Yes.
you're saying that you had a case recently where they lost a kid's head in the belly?
Right. So they're trying to do a C-section and the baby's positioning was terrible. So it took 4 attempts to regrasp the head and pull it out. And ultimately they had to use a vacuum even despite the fact it was the middle of surgery, which isn't super common but happens. They used a vacuum to finally on the 4th attempt to get the head out of the, C-section opening in the belly and get the baby out. So I would say that's a pretty traumatic birth. And the baby's head was above the 99th percentile from birth up until this child had I don't remember exactly whether it was a seizure or stopping breathing until they had their event, let's say. And so they had this enormous head and nobody ever looked at it. Nobody said, hey, there's probably some blood in this brain or something abnormal is happening here. And so I can't remember if the baby was, let's say, a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, somewhere in there. They go in with this event and then there's blood in the head. And to be honest with you, the birth history alone is like so catastrophic that there's plenty of reason to have bleeding in the brain that will
Perfect.
resolve, by the way, just so for people that this happened to, brains do, resolve, the bleeding resolves and goes away. It's not really an indication of abuse. And, clavicle fractures are the most common fracture that occurs during childbirth. So again, I often see cases where it's just a matter of not knowing the birth history. And a lot of the abuse
Mhm.
doctors, they never look at the birth history. Even when you show it to them, they say, we're not gonna change our opinion. So that's a pretty classic case. I mean, that's probably one of the 5 main kinds of cases I get. Some sort of birth issue, forceps delivery, which is known to fracture skulls. Again, you have a live baby at the end. Wonderful. So to be clear, there are always complications, but that's getting ignored when we have these little babies, and so a lot of times that's one of the most common types of cases. And I just look at it. I ask for birth records. I ask for the delivery note. I ask for the pregnancy history so that I can really have a good picture of the whole story. That's what doctors are supposed to do. Learn the story and then interpret the information in a scientific way. I hope I
Do you think
explained that
apart
well.
from bias,
I tried.
you did actually, my mind is so blown. Like, do you think apart from bias that it's also just a sense of laziness?
I hope
Like,
not. You know,
uh,
I still wanna believe doctors are doing their best. I'm not sure if it's an ignorance or a not understanding how many things can go wrong. I've been in trial before and someone will say they tend to be male. They will say, "Oh, everything was fine with delivery." And one of my favorite discussions in court was, wait a minute, there were 5 tears from the pee hole to the vagina, from the vagina back to where you poop out of. Like, I've literally had to paint a picture. Please, everyone, let's imagine how many tears this woman had. That, as a woman, feels painful to discuss, let alone to have happen. And so I really try to draw a picture of what, that's not an uncomplicated delivery. And I think doctors too forget how dangerous childbirth is. I mean, I've got 4 kids myself. I went through it multiple times. Again, mine were relatively okay, but I each time was aware of like how dangerous what I was about to walk into was. And again, not because of the doctors. It's just it's an important, dangerous thing we go through.
So maybe not lazy, but desensitized
Desensitize
from
is a great word, actually. I like that word. Yeah.
right. Like it's they've done so many, births that they have been desensitized to these tears that because they happen. They're frequent. Everyone
Yeah.
has a horror story during pregnancy, um, or C sections, or forceps, or any of those like vacuum things. Like all of the different things that happen so frequently that
Yes.
they're just desensitized, and so they don't think about this as being an event. To, that's so nuts to me because when you're explaining just a few minutes ago, which you have done so incredibly well, by the way, and I think that's probably why you're being
Thank
very
you.
successful in your field. Um, it's nuts to me to like if you have like a 6 month old or a 9 month old with like issues. And I'm not a doctor, but like it makes sense to me that you would look at birth charts.
Yeah, and
It just
especially 3 months and under. A lot of these kids are not even 6 months or 9 months where things kind of have settled themselves. 3 months and under are a lot of these babies.
that's crazy. I mean, there's a and I think about like the trauma that's probably a sort like that they may not remember that this ever happened, but there's an underlining
The
trauma
parents do
that's
though.
going to be the parents do for sure. And I can't even imagine
Yeah.
a mother or father who love their children, who are terrified going to a hospital because there's something wrong with their baby, and then having their baby and perhaps being handcuffed and accused an abuser. Like how
Yes.
now if they did the abuse, that's a different story. But for those who didn't do the abuse, so I feel like your work is necessary. So the risk that you're taking and putting yourself on the line is a risk that's saving families.
I would
That's a
agree with you.
risk.
That's why I keep doing it. And actually, a lot of those families come here now. I don't really take a lot of new patients. I've been doing this a long time. I'm on second and third and even fourth because my father owned this before me. So I will take families that we've taken care of for 50 years, but I will take families who want to come drive the distance to see me as their primary care if they have been accused of abuse and exonerated. I will continue to follow the families. And so many I have followed for the last been doing it. I guess it's almost 5 years I've been doing it now. So, the last 5 years, I've got these cases of families that I've been able to follow. Their children are turning 3 and 4 and 5, and the trauma lingers. These families are afraid to have a second child. They're not sure, if their child falls on the steps at a party, they don't know what to do because they don't wanna go back to the same hospital who hauled them out in handcuffs. And the shame is this chance to build a relationship or build trust with like some great children's hospitals and institutions gets destroyed by really kind of this almost overzealous look at injuries and accidents that really should be obvious to most of us that they're not necessarily abuse.
It's it is mind-boggling. I think I love what you do because
I do too.
if I was in if I was in a situation like that, I would also want a second. Like I'd want somebody to take a
Yeah,
look, right? And but like so I mean you're not just you. You have a team. You have an admin personnel I remember seeing, and then you have a paralegal as well that's helping you because I'm assuming there's court stuff that you have to deal with while you're dealing with all your doctor stuff on top of this and your second opinion. So like and you have 4 kids, you said?
I
That's
do.
a
I
lot of
do.
kids.
Yes.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
a lot of
That's a
kids. I
lot of
love
kids and a
kids.
lot of responsibility. Well,
Yes.
clearly,
Yes.
because this is
My
what you
second
are
oldest
doing for
son did my website.
lo and he did a very good job. He did a very good job. I enjoyed how it
Thanks.
flowed. Actually, when I went to scroll down, it flowed to the side. I was like, "Ooh, I enjoy this. This is nice." So, you're
Yeah.
based out of Washington. Do you only take cases in
Sure.
Washington, or will you actually get cases sent to you from all over the country?
All over the country, and I have one in Canada, as a matter of fact.
Amazing.
So,
So,
yeah,
like,
so,
now
it just
you're international.
Well, sort of. I mean, kind of. It's one case, but it's interesting that the different country does. They do it a little bit differently. There's different. I think it's the crown that's in charge. So
Yes.
it's a little bit yeah, it's a little bit different. But yeah, I work for I think about 24-ish states now. Sometimes new states will reach out and ask for expertise, and it's mostly been word of mouth. I'm not sure. We finally put together. I finally started a business and put together a website, and in this last year. But again, there's only a few of us that do this work, so I hear from people from all over the country, parents, and then once someone has worked with me, they generally, they'll come back with their next case, whatever it is, and so there's a few states that I work with pretty regularly.
So we've talked now through the lens of the 60%, right? But I don't want to ignore the 40%, because the 40%, as a mother of four, as somebody who's working with children all the time, what kind of toll does that take when you get a case and you realize that it is in fact abuse?
Well, it's interesting. We might sometimes want to reevaluate even the way we look at abuse, and that's something I've learned in those 40% cases. I do think poverty plays a role, and
Mhm.
I do think having a doctor you trust or not having a doctor you trust plays a role. And some of those cases are essentially and I'll use one example a child who needs a major surgery, but the family lives in a trailer in the middle of nowhere and they have no running water. And you can't really bring a kid, and they come into care because someone decided it was abuse that they hadn't had this operation yet. And it's like, well, nobody really told the family they need an operation when you go back in the records. So I wouldn't even say that was necessarily abuse. It's just not a situation that can go forward in a reunited way right now. So I often have a larger role than I would say even the child abuse folks do. As again, I'm a general pediatrician. I'm here like on the front lines. So a lot of times I look at the situation and say, hey, this kid cannot go back after having a major surgery to a place with no running water. That's not really the parents' fault. It's not really the kid's fault. It's not really there's not a bad actor here. There's just somebody who can't we just can't find a way around it. So let's come up with a solution that will work. Sometimes it's a young mother who needs to get out of a traumatic situation and they may not even be abusing the child, but they can't protect the child. And I hope that makes sense. Like the other people in the
Yes.
family maybe not. So it's like I don't know that that the child is abusing the other child, right? The 17-year-old mom's not abusing her child. But then I always try to step back and say, wait a second, this kid should be in foster care herself or himself. Then so should the baby. And what supports can we give this person? We need this person out of the home. I get that they're a parent, but we need that parent in a new situation. We need to give them a new start. We need to keep eyes on them. We need to watch them. So while it's an unsafe situation, right? So I have to say, like, this is not defendable. I can't just say, hand the kid back. This is a situation that warrants an intervention. But what's the intervention? Is there a way we can not take the child and really support the person? Another common one is a disabled parent, maybe someone with a lower IQ who's cognitively disabled. They get a child that needs a little more than the average child. They need feeding schedules. They need someone to calculate the formula or how to do different things. That's not an untenable situation. We have supports in place if we can get people hooked in right. So a lot of the situations are not just some awful person who's throwing the baby out the window. To be honest, that's the exception to the rule. I will see that from time to time. And those, I mean, that happens. We know it happens. But the
Yeah.
majority of these cases are things that can be looked at and like mitigated. And sometimes it's a hard conversation with a parent. Like, look, you have a kid over here that's out of control and two or three kids that are getting beaten up by that kid over here. Like, you got to choose. I'm so sorry. And this is very hard, but you either need to work with your disabled child alone, or you need to have this child placed here and these three or four or whatever can come back into the home. So again, really teasing out what's the problem here and what can we do that's kind of the best thing for everyone and the safest thing for the children. So I always come out with like, my job is the safety of the children. It's not even to worry about parents. It's really this kid in front of me. And so that 40% is actually pretty interesting, a lot of the time too, and it's taught me to really think outside the box a little more, and I've had some hard conversations with people I've, like, otherwise never met except on Zoom, and they're not always happy to hear what I have to say, but, I feel like I'm doing what I can to help their child be safe.
So I think in my mind, before you told this last bit, was that, the other 40% were actually just hard and fast sort of abusing their children. It's interesting to think about all of those examples that you just gave, which are the examples that we know of, right?
Right.
We've experienced people in our lives that all have, poverty is probably one of the biggest that we'll come into contact with most of the time.
Homelessness,
Um, home exactly, intellectual,
disabilities.
abilities, all of those particular disabilities, yes. So, like, so I love the idea that it's not necessarily abuse, it's just not necessarily okay to say, "Yes, you can have your child back," because we need to protect the child, and,
Yes.
a house without running water period is you know not a great house to be in if for a child. Like they should have access to running water, clean water, those particular things. So it's nuanced and not nearly as cut and dry as I might have just assumed before we had this conversation, right? And so
Mhm.
I just think that that's something for people to really think about is do you think that people should be reporting willy-nilly? Because I'm assuming you get a lot of cases from doctors, but I know that there's people who call CPS or CAS just because they see something. Like, are there things that you could offer the audience, people that are watching at home, like insights as to what to look out for or what to think about when you think you might want to call CPS?
I'll use one example just to kick that off, which was one of the most interesting cases that I felt ended up being consistent with abuse. And a random adult who was a friend of the parent who was abusing the child was at a grocery store with this child. And I don't remember if the child's 3 or 4 ish, but the child looked kind of injured, like scratched and bruised. And I think it was a social worker who was not tied at all to the case, but had been a social worker previously, just felt really uneasy about what they were seeing. And they called the police. And I remember the police, came. And when you first hear the story, it sounds so implausible, like, oh, this person should have maybe minded their own business. And when I finished looking, again, this is why it's so important to really look at the case and the facts. And when I finished looking at the case and this child had been interviewed and could really speak to what was happening, that social worker was dead on. And I remember thinking, holy moly, like that. I mean, that takes guts. I'm not sure I would have had those guts in the grocery store to like stay, call the police because I saw this random kid. But that social worker saved that kid's life. And so I usually say, like, injuries that don't look normal, if the kid's face is completely scratched up or they have bruises everywhere, I mean, I would call it in. If something doesn't seem right, I think a lot of us that are parents have kind of that gut instinct that something doesn't seem right. And again, this could be any age group. So, someone berating a teenager in the store, slapping them across the face. I'm not saying that doesn't happen sometimes because it does. But something that just doesn't seem right, I would say err on the side of caution and call. Because if that's what's going on in public, imagine what's happening at home. And I think
Mm,
the difference is sometimes what people do is they'll call when a child gets a fracture. Let's say you're at a park and you see the kid fall on a playground equipment and maybe the parent lets them go back and play a little more, but then the kid comes and cry, they take him to the doctor. Like that's pretty normal. I've had people call on that stuff and I always think that's pretty normal. It's when something's really striking to you, I would call certainly, kid that's always breaking something, over your daycare provider. And like every other week, there's new bruises or there's new broken bones or injuries that don't seem to make sense. If you're in the child's life, a teacher, things like that, and you are seeing a pattern that just kind of rubs you the wrong way, I think it's a great idea to call. I would say teachers, in my experience, I just think they're sort of not paralyzed, but they're just not sure. Sometimes a kid will come in and say, "Hey, I didn't eat breakfast," or and it goes beyond that. So ask more questions, again, not trying to fill someone's head. Just say, like, okay, you're hungry. Let's get you cleaned up. Let's get you some new clothes. But if you're needing to change their clothes often at school, or they never come in with food, just some sort of patterns, I think it's worthwhile paying attention to. That's probably what we need to call on more than they have their arm in a cast. Some people will call on their friend when their friend's child breaks their arm, and I always think that really isn't necessary. They're going to the doctor. But it's the ones that fly under
Mm.
the radar to me that seem a little bit more questionable. But again, let the authorities and let CPS sort those out. They're pretty good at doing that. And again, hopefully we'll get a second opinion becoming, a more regular thing.
I don't know how it hasn't been.
I know.
Honestly, I just think it should just naturally be okay. Well, that's great that you gave this. We want to, before we take this person from a home or we take this person permanently, we're going to get a second opinion to review the facts and see if it works. Do you think that there are any psychological cues that people could look out for that are prevalent in abused children?
Well, I will tell you what's
Yeah.
interesting. The science behind it says delay in seeking care. So if you watch somebody, I don't know, let's just say at church or at school or whatever, who falls and like never goes to the doctor but is like not moving their arm for a week, that's a bad sign. So delay in seeking care is probably one of the best signs that there may be abuse. An inconsistent story. The kid keeps telling you the bruises are from daddy or mommy or the babysitter or whatever. And the mom or dad or babysitter always explains them away. So, an inconsistent story or a changing story. Those are probably the big three that have been scientifically sort of proven to be more consistent with abuse than accidental injury. Usually, if a kid's in an accident, you either saw it or you have no idea how they got the bruise. But if that keeps happening multiple times, you have a problem.
Yeah.
And so those are probably the biggest things. And as far as the second opinion, this child abuse is a new specialty. It was created in 2010. People were doing the work that were general pediatricians before that, but they created this new fellowship, this new training program. And I think that's why it hasn't become a standard thing, because we're just starting to find out of these errors and a little bit of the difficulty in, you know, looking at these cases, especially the gray ones, and knowing what really happened.
Well, and the gray ones, I would imagine there's just lots of gray ones.
The majority probably are gray. I mean, and again, those are the calls I'm getting. When it's so obvious that the parent beat the child, I'm not getting those calls, right? And when it's so obvious the child was not harmed by their parents, I'm not getting those calls. I'm getting this like middle of the group where there's the gray areas where people aren't sure.
So where do you go next with all this?
Oh, that's a great question. I started doing these cases thinking I would just do a few here and there, and now I'm sometimes a month behind, which is why I've started adding staff to second opinion and, asking. So what the paralegals are doing is kind of running through the cases and organizing the materials so that I can really look in an organized fashion and not have to dig around and find records. So I think it probably I would love to train more doctors. There are not a lot of doctors who want to do this work because of the risks involved. I think I'd like to get the word out to parents. That's probably the number one thing I'd like to do is I want every parent in America to understand that if you're accused of abuse, you are entitled to a second opinion, whether it's by due process. I'm not an attorney, so whether it's a due process piece or a second opinion, which has been formalized in a couple of states, including Washington, um, you are entitled to ask for a second opinion. And, if fight for your family. Just because somebody said you did XYZ, if you know you didn't do it, talk to your attorney and see about getting a second opinion. I want everyone to know that's an option, because you're not going to be told it's an option by, a child abuse doctor who works at a children's hospital. They're not going to suggest to you go find a general pediatrician to do a second opinion. So I want parents to be aware of it. That's probably the biggest, most important message.
So parents need to understand that they can reach Dr. Niran Al Agba.
Good. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
They can go to secondopinion.md.com.
It's dash.
Uh, l-
Second opinion dash md.com.
yes, I don't have my glasses on. I didn't see it, but I will link it in the description as well,
Perfect.
so you'll be able
Perfect.
to get there. And then I would also love to see. Plus, if you're in Canada, just this
Yes.
this is another thing. Um, through the Crown, you can request a second opinion. Um, I'd love to see some standardization in it, with also some legislation or insurance for protection for people who are doing the second opinion work, right? Because it's risky, as you had mentioned. And I think if you are putting yourself on the line for all of these families, whether it turns to be good or it turns to be not so good or it turns to be really awful, at the end of the day, like I feel like that work should be protected because of its intrinsic value, right? You're keeping families that should be together still together and making necessary steps for families who may need a reprieve of whatever that may look like. So I think that that's what should happen. So how do we make that happen? Is there anywhere that we could go as an audience, as a group of people, to sort of like support the cause or spread word? Just everybody just go to the website and send you a message,
I
tell your friends.
I think yeah, I think the most important thing yeah, I think the most important thing is to destigmatize. I think the most important thing is to
I like that.
destigmatize, child abuse. Like, just because you're accused doesn't mean you did it. Number 2, doesn't mean you're a bad parent. Number 3, doesn't mean anything about you. Like, it happens to millions of children in America. I think it's 3 million children every year, and 700 children are removed from their home on a day, every single day in America. So, this is a huge number of people that child abuse accusations are impacting. And it's probably your friend, your neighbor, your relative. They're just afraid to tell you. So when they tell you, no different than domestic violence. I mean, I understand it's different, but to be clear, I'm not sure it's always a parent's fault, right? Just like it's not a woman's fault or a man's fault, whoever's being abused by their spouse or by their partner, right? Intimate partner violence isn't the fault of the victim. And so I would say, rather than blaming, let's start looking at how to make sure children are safe. And so again, being a
Yeah.
listening ear, encouraging families that there's a second opinion option, because there may even be a medical diagnosis that was missed. Those are probably the biggest, like, cultural pieces to this. And then if you are a legislator or a politician or someone who is interested in, protecting children, being aware that second opinions save lives. They save families. They help reunite families that should be reunited. They strengthen cases where families should not be reunited and children need intervention or additional services. They can only support the safety of children, in general. And so, essentially, trying to provide a pathway for that to happen. And whether it's nonprofit organizations or essentially like the Innocence Project does a lot of these cases as well. They're another great resource. Um, Organizations like that, supporting justice organizations that are looking at wrongful convictions or looking at emphasizing forensic evidence as opposed to circumstantial or bias, which is a lot of these cases. So just again, being aware and changing our own biases.
And to me, I mean, I will say it again, but I just feel a second opinion feels like such a no brainer to
Yeah,
me,
it's a time
right?
honored
So
medical
like
tradition, right? It's always two heads are better than one. It's going to be more accurate. Yeah,
exactly. So thank you for what you do. I think it's really incredible.
thank you.
I'm sure there's a lot of families who owe being back together to you, and a lot of children who probably owe their lives and their well-being to the work that you do as well. So thank you for taking those risks and coming on this show and talking about it today. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for
And oh, literally, my pleasure. This was such a great conversation, and like the work is so important and crucial, and we just got to get the word out
yeah.
and make sure families know that they can get a second opinion. For everyone at home, until next time, I want you to get out there and I want you to live your wildest dream.